Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It is my great pleasure to introduce today Nafisa Valieva, who is a postdoctoral fellow at Collège de France, trained as a philologist and a theologian at the Old Language and Oriental Studies in Tikhon Orthodox University of Moscow. She obtained her PhD in 2019 at the University of Hamburg. Her thesis had the title the Gadla Lalibala collection of textual units, tradition and documentation, and was prepared under the supervision of Marie TeTra and Alessandro Bausi. After a PhD, Nafisa Valieva joined the ERC project toward NIST at Yerevan Marseille University. And amongst her publication, I would like to mention the article giving depth to the TEI-based description of manuscripts, the Golden Gospel of Ham, that she co-authored this year together with Pietro Maria Liuzzo, and the article Manuscript Ethiopic 4 of the collection of the India Office, a straight manuscript of Gadla Lalibala. Today, Nafisa will present a paper entitled Textual Unit, a Physical and Logical Articulation in the Ethiopic Gadla Lalibala collection. Nafisa, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Georgia, for inviting me to this seminar and the organizers, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. Now I will share my PowerPoint. Okay, I will change into the presentation mode. Can you see it now?
Perfect.
Okay, I'm a bit nervous, but it will pass, hopefully. Yes, so the talk I'm giving today is based on my dissertation, but a lot of what I present is actually based on the researches done by Antonella Britta, Ted Erho, and also previously by Jonas Carlsson. So you will see that even if Jonas defended his thesis after, I have now new questions thanks to his work. So the title of my talk is Textual Unit, its Physical and Logical Articulation in Greece Ethiopic Gadla Lalibala collection. I will give you some context in order that you can understand what is my corpus and the results and limits of my corpus. Who is Lalibala, first of all? Lalibala was a king who is attested in historical sources in Arabic and Greece and by various evidence. He ruled in 12th, 13th century, the Ethiopian kingdom. But my dossier relates to his hagiography because postmortally he was recognized as a saint. One of the main things for which he is renowned is the construction of the 10 or 11 or 12 rock-hewn churches, which are today known as Lalibala churches in Ethiopia. General context about Greece manuscripts. We have manuscripts from 5th century up to date. Is still ongoing tradition of manuscript production. The number estimated is 200,000. Its content is mainly liturgical, theological, historical, or hagiographical, although it is this definition is very fluctuating. Material support is mainly parchment, traditionally up to the 19th century sharp, and starting from 19th century with some variations of paper. The main form of the church codex, manuscripts is codex. The language is Greece, although we have some code switching with Amharic or Tigrinya, other Ethiopic languages. And the script is Fidel, which is the script are used for Greece language, but nowadays also for Amharic or Tigrinya, and which is a syllabary. It is a writing system that is believed to derive from Sabaic, and then from the 1st century it developed a system of vocalization. My corpus of manuscripts is dated only from the 14th century to 20th century. Out of 34 manuscripts that I could trace, I have analyzed 23, so it is very, very short sample of manuscripts, if you can see the Gaze manuscript culture. The content is hagiographic text, material support is parchment, but also paper, and I will talk about it: form codex, language Greece, script fidele. I do not have code switching into Amharic or Tigrinya in my main text, but I have notes in other languages transmitted in the manuscripts along the Gadla Lalibala collection. So I will start with the manuscript, which stands apart from my main corpus of manuscripts. It is a manuscript British Library Ethiopic 4. Georgia mentioned my contribution on this manuscript. What is important about this manuscript? This manuscript was commissioned by German missionary Johannes Ludwig Rapp. So it was produced in Ethiopia, but he brought the material, he brought paper, and what is important, we have characteristics which is very uncommon for Ethiopic manuscripts. We have a title, Gadla Lalibala, and this title has influenced the further perception of this text according to what we can see. This manuscript was used by August Dillman for the lexicon, and in this way it was introduced into scholarly world, into scholarly discussion, and most of the catalogues who would deal with manuscripts of a similar content, they would define it as Gadla Lalibala or other variants, Italian or English, X of Lalibala, Vita of Lalibala, History of Lalibala, because Gadla can be interpreted in various ways. Literally, it means struggle, but it can have different correspondences. So this very uncommon feature cannot be found in manuscripts prior to 20th century, produced in Ethiopia by Ethiopians within the frames of this manuscript culture. But we don't find titles. From what I could see, there are book titles labels. They can be found at any place, but often in the subscriptio, and this I defined as a subscriptio type title after the contribution by Paola Bozzi, and then in the same way as Antonella referred to it, Antonella Britta. This is a text occurring at the end of a work, and it can be a colophon. Also, it can be the book title label can be attested in a colophon and can be attested in a donation note. It is not a colophon or donation note is not a subscriptio type title. Another type of titles that we attest are inscriptio type titles. And inscriptio is a title occurring at the beginning of a textual or narrative unit. The same phenomena is titles in margins. I would say that they have the same function as inscriptio type titles, but from what I could see in my corpus, they are added by a secondary hand. This type of titles are inscriptio and titles in the margin. They are not attested in all manuscripts of my collection and not for all textual units that I define as textual units. So this is an optional title, and it can work only within the codex or only within the manuscript, because what we can see, it is miracle number 1, miracle number 2, miracle number 3. It can it cannot be used as an outer reference. It becomes meaningless outside the codex. It can be only used for the sake of liturgical readings or other things referring to this particular codex. And the third way to refer to texts is incipits, so the opening words of the textual unit proper. And you cannot find it in, you find incipits, but you cannot find reference to these same incipits in manuscripts, because it is a mean to refer to it. But we find in modern editions, in table of contents, this type of reference used by incipits. We find other ways, other works, manuscripts that are referred in this way in medieval ages, but these examples are very rare. So if we do not have titles, if book titles refer only approximately to the actual content of the manuscript, and from what we can see also, manuscripts with a slightly or completely different content can be referred to with the same book titles. Inscriptio or titles and margins are optional, and incipits need to be identified. How can we define a textual unit and the content of a book? So I tried to formulate some of the elements, mainly in order to understand what was an evidence for modern editions to refer to divergent textual units, because I wanted to understand whether this way of defining textual units as they did relies on something, and if it relies on something, on what it relies. So one of the elements that I identified as indicative are supplications. It is a portion of text which is usually and typically a plea for intercession. These supplications are also often used for dating because we have historical figures noted. In this example, you have an empty space for someone to be further commemorated and inserted, and the name of a scribe, Walter Georges. Another group of elements is mise en texte and mise en page. I have difficulties to differentiate exactly what is mise en texte and what is mise en page in my cases, so I put them together, and this can be spacing, compound punctuation, paragraphing, subdividing, the use of colors, punctuation marks, repetition of groups of dots, dotted line, cross, etc. What is important, I could not study this in my corpus, but I can see that the earlier manuscripts have used less rubrication, and with time, rubrication becomes more present. What Jonas Karlsson could see based on his corpus is that from rubrication develops from semantic rubrication to a symmetrical rubrication, which also changes our perception, of course, and should make us more critical concerning what is rubricated. That's why I say that these elements should be considered in groups and cannot be interpreted indicative alone. Syntax to codex, I will explain it later if I have time. But this is a concept which was introduced by Marilena Maniaci, Patrick Andrist, and Paul Canard. The idea to identify units of production and units of circulation, which with some luck can indicate a different sequence of texts, even if the texts that are not necessarily built up as a collection. So what I did, I put all elements in a table, inscriptio and titles in margins, supplications, a particular mise en texte, and sequence of texts. The sequence of text I could identify only based on this manuscript, for which I could identify 2 units of production. But I also used modern editions to see whether the textual units are placed differently, because it means that they have some level of independency. And when I saw that 2 or more coincide, and if, of course, internal logic, the text flow does not contradict to it, I postulated that there is a textual unit. And then I gave titles, working titles, based on the content of these textual units. So instead of what was after Krab's manuscript defined as Gadla Lalibala, I changed it into Gadla Lalibala collection that contains 14 textual units, and this is a basic collection. With this collection, I had more problems, and that's why I developed this complex system. But in fact, what is defined as Gadla Lalibala book can vary more in content. You can have 15 textual units or more. It's just that since they do not constitute a core collection, it is much easier to postulate that there are other textual units that are independent. Thank you very much. Yes, based on these elements, I have created a definition of what is textual unit, which is still a working definition and needs to be tested on other manuscripts, other corpuses, to see whether it can, this methodology is applicable to a more general corpus. But what is important is that regardless whether we take into consideration the presence of these elements or not, they influence us. They influence our perception. And this can be seen from all the editions which were not considering material part of the manuscripts, but whenever they would make a choice of which passages to select, they very often were led by rubrication or other elements. They would skip supplications concerning it, something not so informative, and so on and so forth. So these elements need to be taken into account critically. And yes, for someone who is struggling to define what is the content, they can be informative. Thank you very much. I now stop sharing my presentation. If you have questions related to my PowerPoints, I will share again. Yes.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting and very informative presentation, even for those that work on other traditions. We're inviting now questions or any sort of reactions to Nafisa's presentation. And I'm very happy to throw the first question in, a question of detail. You've mentioned at some point that you have subtitles, I'm not sure how to refer to them, that are meaningless outside the context, outside the codex,
yes.
Like book 1, book 2. I mean, of course, when we edit text, we can, and it's often the case, especially modern, we invent a new way of dividing the text that makes it more manageable, more retrievable, or whatever. But we tend to keep the ones that we find in the codices too. What do you mean in this case? In which way are they meaningless outside the codex? I'm just curious.
Yes, okay. They tell us that there is something what is autonomous. So it is one of the indicative things for me to postulate a textual unit. But I wrote an article on it, and it should appear in Oxford publication online. It has a function for liturgical readings. So the textual units that bear titles in my corpus, they are perceived as miracles, even if they are not strictly speaking miracles. It's just that they do not have other title than Miracle 1, Miracle 2, and in someone's in the corpus of another saint, you might have Miracle 1, Miracle 2, Miracle 3. So if you say in Miracle 1 we find this, it is not intelligible for the audience what you are talking about. That's why it works within the codex, because it is in a position you can say, okay, Miracle 1 is not Miracle 2, Miracle 2 is not Miracle 3.
I see what you mean. So you, in an edition, would be keeping them, and in referring to whatever it's under Miracle 1, you need
Yes.
more data
Yes.
in order to say it's.
I will keep them as a paratextual elements, or as yes, in a different apparatus where I keep all the information that can be interesting for different kind of research, but not necessarily crucial for the text itself.
Thank you. I'm throwing. Please, Georgia.
Thank you very much. This is a question from someone who would never worked on this edition, so apologies if it sounds like not on the point, but you mentioned that sometimes margin titles can be in the margins. So I was wondering whether you have in your corpus other marginal notes or signs that point to important passages or to like notes of readers or any other marginal.
Of course, margins. Yes, thank you very much, Georgia, for this question. Margins, of course, are used, maybe not as in such a complex way as in other manuscript traditions, but we have corrections inserted into margins. If a passage was omitted, it can be added in the margin, and the sign in the text will be pointing where to insert this passage. We have indication for monthly readings in the margins. We have signs. Yes, so we have signs for sometimes the scribe would note what should be written later in red ink in the margins. So margins are extensively used for different purposes. Sometimes in commentary literature, but I do not work with these types of manuscripts, so I cannot say it.
And if I may throw in just a follow-up question, do you see any tradition in a way, meaning that when you're making the edition of your text, do you see, if you have families of text, can you use marginal annotation, or do you see that some marginal notes or signs move from one manuscript to the other, or there's no relation between families of manuscripts and what they have in margins?
Yes. In some cases, what can be in margins and constitute a paratextual information, I have a feeling and I have an hypothesis that at some point they became part of the tradition, and so I have different stemma codicum for the paratextual elements and for the text itself. It needs to be carefully analyzed, but it cannot be used at least it cannot be used for the stemma codicum. This for sure, because this is something so autonomous, so much. It can be related so much to the practice and not to the text and not to the process of the copying. So.
Very interesting. Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, just a very basic question. Thank you for the very interesting talk. Whenever I hear about a new saint, I want to go and read about them. So my very basic question is, can we find out about this person in English or some other readily accessible European language?
Yes, for sure. And I mean, for in English, you have 5 volumes of
oh, wonderful.
It's an Encyclopedia Ethiopica.
Okay.
And it contains a lot of entries about saints.
But an actual translation of one of the lives itself, of these miracles.
The Life of Lalibala was edited and translated only by Perrochon, but based on his translation, Richard Pankhurst, he translated one of the textual units as a chronicle of Lalibala. If you are interested, I can send it to you. I would not use this as something to be informed. I myself edited and translated some of the textual units, and I'm in the process of editing the complete collection. But you have to wait with me. I can send you what Pankhurst did, although, yes, I'm not happy with what he did, but we have something. Yes,
we have something. Okay.
Mm.
I can hunt around on the internet and I will find it somewhere.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Can I piggyback on Georgia's question? Is the practice of writing titles in the margin spread? Is it something that you find often in Ethiopian manuscript in general? Because it looks like a practice, like it's there, you have the margin, you might have forgotten the title, or even it could be a way to put it more, but it doesn't happen very often in the traditions that I'm working on. And I'm wondering if this is occasional, or it can be an established practice, or it's just, you know, a reader identifies a text as they go, read through and put a note in the margin that this belongs to a different text than the main title earlier.
Yes, as I told you, that I tried to explain these inscriptio type titles or titles in the margins, they refer to the practice. So I think that they are introduced when they feel that they want to define the practice, because from what I can establish, they read a portion from the life and a miracle. So in order to navigate within the codex, you need to have defined what is a miracle. From my corpus, I have only one manuscript that has these titles in the margins. How to which extent it is a common, maybe the or TeTra work more with the manuscripts and cataloging more manuscripts, they can say more, but I'm not the right person, because I work with my corpus and not with the entire tradition for the moment.
It's fine within your corpus. It's fine.
Yes, within my corpus, it is not at all representative. It is only one manuscript.
Sort of a user notes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophia, please.
Thank you. Judged on your last statement, Nafisa, maybe I should withdraw my question, because I wanted to dig deeper into the idea of titles. But now you say that you don't want to, that you're focused on your
No, titles are interested if you want to.
Okay, cool, perfect. So, because I mean, if we look at older gospel books, for example, we often have in a very decorated form, like Besrate Johannes, and so clearly mise en texte
Yes.
point of view, very clearly distinguished. But what do you think also, for example, about the Magdala collection, where the titles of the books are written in the upper margin, and this was done, I mean, it was done late in the 19th century, but it was done, if I'm not wrong, by the Ethiopian priests in Magdala.
Yes,
And
but
sorry if I can. And what I find interesting that there are so many multiple text manuscripts. So they took one text and wrote it as the title. And so this I find very interesting and want to hear your thoughts, or
yes.
everybody else's thoughts.
Yes, I think that we should analyze analyze separately the tradition for translated texts and locally composed texts. Yes, I think that Antonella's corpus will show more, because there are some inscriptio type titles, for example, that are inherited from papyri manuscripts. So all these or these elaborated titles, inscriptio type titles, which are proper titles that can be also inherited. And I also think, yes, Antonella will develop on it. That Erho will, I hope, also develop on it. And I think that we need to, yes, we have in Ethiopic tradition this be'inter, but I do not know to which extent it is common also for hagiographic texts. We need to study this in order to have a broader conclusions. As for Magdala collection, I would say what you're referring to, these are also book labels or book titles. So these are not, I mean, everything is a title. We just need to define what it is defining and what is the function of this title. But yes, I will be happy for the edition by Antonella and Ted. Thank you. I will mute myself.
Ted and then Antonella. Ted, please.
Yeah, I'll just sort of respond, build on what Nafisa said and respond to Sophia's question. The reason titles are created in the Ethiopian tradition is for manuscripts. It's not for text. Now, there are titles for texts occasionally that have been in particular taken over from Greek. So Ergeta Isaiah's Nabi, the Ascension of Isaiah, is a title that has been translated from, likely translated from Greek, and it appears as a title in manuscript. And so we also get this in gospel books, where titles have been taken over. In the first case from the Greek tradition, the title was translated as part of, seems to have been translated as part of the translation itself. And then when the title changed from Wangel to Besarata, my suspicion is that somehow is taken over from the Arabic tradition during the revision of the Ethiopian Bible. And so, but to go back to this issue of titles being for manuscripts and not books. So yes, there are many multiple text manuscripts in the Magdala collection that are called by one book, because this is the Ethiopian practice. In general, we find precisely the same thing in inventory lists from, basically the 14th century onwards, where you have manuscripts that probably, and certainly in some cases, certainly because we actually have the manuscripts that are recorded in these inventories that have multiple texts, but normally they are called by only a single title and not all of the works in the manuscript, because they're needed for inventory purposes. You need to know that, this is a manuscript with the Anchoratus. It doesn't matter if it also has the commentary of Chrysostom on Hebrews with it as well. For inventory purposes, it's sufficient to simply know that, the first work in the manuscript is the Anchoratus. That is sufficient for these purposes. Now, because the commentary on Hebrews can also appear as the first or principal work in a manuscript can also be called after that, and therefore that exists as a title as well. But it's really only, I think, in about the 19th century, maybe the late 18th century, that we start getting inventories that will actually, enumerate multiple books from the same manuscript. And within Magdala and even most inventory lists still adhere to the more traditional formulation where it's a manuscript is titled after the principal work in the manuscript, and because principally manuscripts are copied in their entirety to simply reproduce, traditionally titles refer to this. So a great example is Orient 691 at the British Library from Magdala. Now this is a relatively well-known hagiographical homiletical manuscript that contains, I think it's 13 or 19 texts. I don't remember the exact number. We would consider these individual textual units. At the very end of that manuscript, there is this very notable colophon that says this is the book of Enbacom that was written in the time of Yakba Zion. And contra right, this is actually from that time, and much confusion has been had over this. Some have speculated that, oh, this refers to the first text in the manuscript, the Apocryphon of Habakkuk. No, it doesn't. This refers to the manuscript itself. The whole manuscript is titled after the first work. So this collection, which is reproduced in more or less in, I think, 5 other known manuscripts, is called Enbacom. The entire manuscript is called after that. It's not, the collection is known as that. The individual works in the collection don't have titles. And so that's basically the point I would make.
Thank you very much. Nafisa, would you like to?
To thank Ted, yes, thank you very much, Ted.
Okay, Antonella, please.
Yes, on the same topic, and also on the same line of what Ted has already said. The idea of title of books, it's something modern. It's something that I think it's not very common in the more ancient collections, and we can really see that when we study these multiple text manuscripts, where we have not really a title, but rather a label. No? Ted has just made the example of Enbacom. The same can be said, for instance, for the Gadla Lalibala. This is not a title. This is a label. It's, let's say, something abstract that refers specifically to a certain collection of text. And we can clearly see it, for instance, as in the case of the Gadla Lalibala, because then each text has its own title. And what is interesting, for instance, in the Gadla Lalibala, but not exclusively, is that many of the text, and allegedly the text that comes from an earlier layer, they have 2 titles, and it's a clear title. It's just martyrdom of this person, not the name of the person. One is at the beginning and one is at the end. What is interesting is what happens to the title at the end, because during the transmission of the text, this title at the end somehow loses the original function. That maybe is the function that derives from the transmission of those texts in scrolls, where a title at the end was meaningful. It loses this meaning when the text is copied in manuscripts. So what is interesting is to see how the different scribes interpret this title at the end. Some of them keeps it as a title, as it is. Some other scribes just delete it, just delete the title, and some others had a fatsime, so it is completed, the martyrdom and so on, to give a new meaning. What is still unclear is that what kind of a function in the liturgical practice this title at the end had, also later when the texts were transmitted in manuscripts. But here, in the individual text, is clear that they have a title. They are called in a specific way. And concerning the margins, now what is written in the margins, very often there are the indication reading, the liturgical, for the liturgical practice. And if you compare the form, the shape of the reading indication with the title, with the exact title of the text, they differ, because the reading indication written in the margin contains, okay, there is no a universal shape. This can vary, but it contains the basic information to use the text during the liturgical performance. So there is a date and usually the name of the saint. Sometimes there is also they used to have menbabo reading, something like that. But in the case of the collections of multiple text manuscripts, I would not call this margin information a title, because when you compare them with the actual title of the individual text, their shape is completely different. What is interesting, we were talking about philology and how to render the titles when we do critical editions. I think that the title at the end of the text in the subscriptio, when it's present, should be kept like that as it is, because this is obviously a relic of transmission. So it refers, or here it attests the most ancient layer in the transmission of the text. So now, then concerning a label and titles of books, I think a title becomes a label can become a title when a certain collection is somehow canonized or receives an official recognition, which means the arrangement of the text starting from a certain point in the history is transmitted always in the same shape. I mean, the order can vary, the order of the text, but the text should be always the same. Is, for instance, I don't know, the Bible. Now, the Bible, if we consider the Bible, this was also at the beginning a multiple text book. But then, starting from a certain time, it is a stable collection. So, and then in that case, a title with the meaning of title, a real title, makes sense. But in the most ancient collections, titles of multiple text manuscripts, I don't think it makes sense. The word title, it's not really a title. I don't. This is what This is my opinion.
But you would keep them in the apparatus in some way if you edit that text, even if they are not meaningfully titles as something else. You would keep them somewhere. You would give an account of them as well. Is this correct?
I mean, in the individual textual units. I mean, because when I do an edition, I do the edition of the textual unit of the individual text. No, in that case, yes, and I try to identify the oldest shape, which is the oldest. Of course, this depends also on the aim of the edition. No?
Yeah, of course.
In the case of text translated, of course, you try to reconstruct the oldest layer of transmission. So in that case, I would keep the bare title in the main text, all the variants in the apparatus. I mean, the omission or the adding of effects and so on. We are now working on the edition of a book on whose title is Titles, Labels, and Names of Multiple Text Manuscripts. This is, let's say, an investigation of the what a title, a label is in several in different manuscript cultures. This will be sent to print in March, so next year should be published.
Very good. That should be interesting.
Let's hope.
Thank you, Antonella. And we are waiting for both books on Gadla Samartad and more on Gadla Samartad, because this will allow us to build, because since Ethiopic indigenous tradition is based on first translations, and then they develop their own system, and it will allow us to build upon the translated textual transmission, what was changed or developed or kept for proper Ethiopic tradition. In my corpus, I do not have subscriptio type titles that are relics, because these are texts that were composed in Greece directly. So these are not translated texts. And also the titles, the inscriptio type titles, at the beginning, they are later phenomenon. So they are 2 centuries later, not earlier. I think in my corpus, the proper reference are incipits. So the incipits are the titles, and this is also indirectly attested in the editions, the modern editions, because the Ethiopic modern editions, they can be seen as Latin 15th century first printed editions, which to a great extent rely on the manuscript tradition. So they are much more closer to the manuscript tradition, and they also show the liberty, because you talked about the canonized sequence. If you consider the manuscripts, and I think that there is a practical reason, it is much easier to copy the text in the same way as it appears in your model manuscript. So you need to have, I do not know, you need either to have a purpose to change the sequence, or something needs to happen to the manuscript physically. So the folios should be displaced, or something needs to happen in order that you interfere and change the sequence, because it requires much more work.
Yes, it's true. And talking about titles, for instance, when this ancient texts were taken out from multiple text manuscripts and copied in a single text, although single text is not really correct, but an individual manuscript, you know, this is the case of many hagiographies in Greece, when the Gadla starts to grow, and also sections of miracles are added. And it's interesting because it loses the original title. I mean, the original title is just substituted by a large incipit, which contains just a summary of what is more or less the general content of the text.
Yeah.
And I would agree to call Gadla, in this case, Gadla Lalibala or whatever, more a label than a title, because it contains the life, it contains the miracles, often the milk and so on. So it's another type of multiple text manuscript.
Yes, this is the reason why I decided, at the one hand, to keep Gadla Lalibala, because it is informative, because it informs us about types of books, but because to indicate the divergent content, I say that it is a collection, and then within the collection we can distinguish. So you can say, you can talk about Gadla Sematat collection and then talk about individual texts, I think.
But what is, sorry, the last thing, and then I mute myself. The important thing is to always to see, to evaluate both titles and labels from the perspective of the tradition we are working on. I mean, a label should be attested, as it is the case of Gadla Sematat, Gadla Lalibala, and Bacom has Ted said before. I mean, they must always be something that the manuscript culture itself uses and recognizes as such. No, it's not something that I don't know, a foreign cataloger or someone who compiles an inventory just invents to give a name to a collection that doesn't have a name. So,
I do. I give titles to the textual units that do not have titles, but I say that I do it.
okay, but this is for scholarly purposes, yes. No, of course, because otherwise a text becomes heavy and not readable. It's our need to structure a text that doesn't have an apparent structure according to our idea of yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Erna Shirinian, please. You're still muted.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And if I may, I also want to add something on the titles, because it's not so simple, and sometimes we are simplifying, but now, I mean, it's not like at the time of Aristotle, they were titles and he was very good at titles. And then at Christian time, it changed and they were not titles like we know. The Panalion, example of Panalion of Epiphanius, the word which was found on the 6th page and put as a title. But at the meantime, we have such a thing like, let's say, the commentary of John Chrysostom on Acta Apostolorum. And he has a special also, let's say, prolegomena, which is dedicated to the titles, to the incipits, to the titles, which is one of the main questions of so-called schema isagogicum. Schema isagogicum, which is actually was used by Proclus, in the beginning by Origen, but it's something that comes from philosophy. And one of the main questions of this schema was aithia tes epigraphes, meaning why this work was called by this title. And John Chrysostom explains why Acta Apostolorum was called like this, was not called miracles or by other word, but it was called acta. So I want to say that in Christian time, we have this special attitude towards the title. And also there is another thing about collections, about the collections of Cappadocian fathers, especially Gregory of Nazianzus, that in Armenian tradition, we have such a phenomenon. We have collections which are combined under one title, meaning a few of his homilies are combined under the one title using incipit, as I say, or incipit, like you say. So, for example, prostus, starting from prostus, and I think that actually it was tradition, that tradition was in Greek also, but somehow it disappeared and now it's only you can find in Armenian. So I mean this question about really more sophisticated that we think, and maybe it's really connected with the style of the work. I mean, which genre of the work it is. So we have here the example that is part of the Bible, like Acta Apostolorum, and the homilies by Gregory of Nazianzus. And I think this is very, very interesting topic that should be developed. And to add just, I should say that in Armenian manuscripts, we also have examples where the title is written in margin. So sometimes it is when the title is lost or there is person who want to add this title, but not in autograph, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm not specialist of Armenian culture, but I think since I spent a lot of time in the Center for Manuscripts Cultures, which dealt with different manuscript cultures. Yes, in each culture needs to be regarded individually, and each yeah, it is very interesting. What I wanted to say, I want now to come back because now we move to titles. What I was trying to present in my talk is that even if there are not titles, it does not mean that the content is homogeneous. And this is something that we need to struggle to accept, that even if nothing indicates that here is a different text, here you have a title, or any common way for us to mark the text, we need to see also what are the navigating elements or elements that the scribes developed for themselves. And this can be different from in the course of time, but we need to pay attention to this. And this is from my perspective, I see that this is very little studied, and of course it is difficult, and I would not maybe study this if I would not struggle, because in my corpus of manuscripts, my saint died 2 times, and so it was very strange. I needed to solve concrete question. Is the text intelligible? How am I supposed to read this text? And then I started to see whether we can actually differentiate and to talk about different texts with different authors, with different backgrounds. And the problem is, once you see something, you can't unsee. So that was also my struggle, to see whether what I'm seeing relies on something what is solid. Yeah. I do not know whether in other manuscript cultures in Syria you have a. I mean, this is something what we are facing because we do not have, most of the texts are still not edited. And so you really need to define what is the content of a manuscript in front of your eyes. And if you do not have we do not have a clavis which would allow us to to simply understand and compare and just say, okay, here this is this, this is this, this is this. But maybe you had this this work done previously, or you also have some problems. I would be interested in this because I tried to discuss it with people who work with Latin manuscripts or Greek manuscripts, but this can't be done because you have the position of minuscula, minuscula, and the problem is so different that and the editions were started to circulate since such an early time. Yes, if we have time, I would be interested to hear from the perspective of specialists from other cultures.
Thank you. Very interesting. If we don't have another question, I'll throw one in just to end on a very light note. You've mentioned la syntaxe du codex, and I always ask people, codicologists who work on different traditions than the Greek and the Latin, does the theory that they well, their theoretical approach that from the book, does it apply entirely and with no problems to Ethiopic manuscripts, or it needs to be in every tradition readjusted to fit in the material realities?
I think that it does work very well. I mean, the examples are different. The different choir structure is applicable because we also have Queen Quatorians, and I mean, you can constitute the normal choir structure and then see whether there is a caesure also, and change of hands, different layout, choir numbering, and so on and so forth. This is actually, we are using it extensively in our tradition. I think that Ethiopian domain is young, tiny, but we are very much advanced, and this is I mean, the Beta Metzahift even developed the also the encoding TI encoding not methodology, but samples for and how you can postulate a hypothesis based on the syntactic codex.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for clarifying that as well, and for a very informative paper altogether. I'm sure everyone will join me in thanking you for an excellent presentation today. And yeah, very good seeing everyone. See you the next time.
Thank you very much.
Bye
Thank you
bye
also everyone for joining.
Okay, bye bye.
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 Thank you very much. Thank you for taking time for comments.
Thank you, Nafisa.